Do Huawei's new Mate phones live up to the hype? And what's the deal with Google charging phone makers for apps in the EU?
Vertical Hold, Behind the Tech News, is proudly brought to you by Belkin.
Welcome to Vertical Hold, Behind the Tech News, where we talk to Australia's leading technology journalists to get the stories behind the news of the week. Now this week, we've once again taken the show on the road, in this case to London for the Huawei Mate 20 launch. In the interest of due disclosure, I've travelled here as a guest of Huawei, and Adam hasn't. He's not joining me for this show. So instead, I've broken the emergency glass to grab two very special guests from Pickr.com.au, Leigh Stark.
Hey Alex, good to be here.
And from PC World, Fergus Halliday.
Hello.
Now, we're going to get into the news really quickly, but before we start, I should note that this is our 200th episode, which is awesome. And I've got to just quickly throw out 4 quick thank yous. First and foremost, of course, to our excellent show sponsors, Belkin. Secondly, to the huge number of the cream of the crop of Australia's tech journalists, 2 of which are sitting in front of me right now, but there have been so many more that if I thanked everyone, this show would run about 5 hours for guesting and giving their expert analysis each and every week. Thirdly, of course, to my regular co-host, Adam Turner, who's taught me more about AFL than I ever wanted to know. And of course, lastly, to you, the listener, because without you guys, we really wouldn't have a show. Now, let's get on with the show. And we were here for the big show of the reveal of Huawei's new Mate 20 line. Now, Leigh, we knew that they had the Mate 20 and the Mate 20 Pro coming, and I guess we should dive into those first, because we've all had a fair bit of hands-on time with the Mate 20 Pro especially.
Yep.
What makes it special in a year where we've had so many really good smartphones?
It's really interesting. I mean, as you said, it's been a year pretty much that's been dominated by smartphones and smartphone cameras. This one's a slight reinvention from Huawei's point of view on the smartphone camera. Previous generations, in fact, the past, I guess, 3 years, the camera design has been basically a dual camera system with a black and white camera in the back end while working with the color system, and they've kind of gone away from that this time. It's now an ultra wide, a standard so wide, and a telephoto lens working together, which can allow you to do some really cool things, but most importantly, I guess from Huawei's point of view, has some artificial intelligence connected to it, which is something they've been trying to push more and more with their chipset, especially in this recent 7nm Kirin 980. I mean, there's a lot of really cool things in this phone. In many ways, it's kind of like what we wanted an evolutionary phone to be like. There's an in-screen fingerprint sensor, there's the water resistance we all like, and there's some really cool wireless stuff. It's exciting because it's different. It's the same but yet different. It's an evolution. And I think I'm not the only one excited by it.
Yeah, no. It seems so far like a really solid phone. It's very interesting as well, given how recently the P20 Pro was and how much of a big jump that was from their previous P10 hardware, that they've actually managed to do what I would call 2 pretty significant jumps in terms of their smartphone hardware within the space of a single year, when you've got people like Samsung and Apple, which have definitely, like, their handsets this year, the S9, the Note 9, and the iPhone XS, those are all good devices, but they're not a huge reinvention of what they did last year.
It's interesting you say they're a reinvention, because one of the first things when I got my hands on the Mate 20 Pro that I thought was it wasn't so much a visual reinvention as it was a P series phone. It's a much more style-centric phone, where the previous Mates were really business phones. They were kind of serious.
Yeah. It's really interesting too, because the P20 Pro, which we didn't get the P20 in Australia, but the P20 Pro and the Mate 20 look so close to each other in size, and that's not something even the P and the Mates have really ever had in common. The Mates were the big phones, and the Ps were the, mostly big phones, but this time they are so close in size, I don't really know what the P is there for. That's the most confusing thing with the launch of the Mate 20 Pro, which is we've all had some hands-on times. I wouldn't say that anyone should really be reviewing it yet, but definitely those of us writing previews and hands-ons are certainly enjoying our time with it. I don't really know, and I like the P20 Pro a lot. I don't really know what it's there for now.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see where they go with that, because the one thing I guess the Mate series has always had is that's where Huawei's tended to introduce its new Kirin chipset.
Yeah.
Fergus, they've also though introduced new storage options. The P20 Pro didn't have expandable storage. This does, but there's a catch, isn't there?
Yeah, well, they've introduced a new memory standard called nano memory, correct?
Nano memory.
Yeah.
NM.
It's not a very sticky name, but essentially it's like a micro SD but smaller, which allows them to use less space internally and potentially have a bigger battery and do things like that, which is interesting conceptually. But in terms of looking at it as a consumer and a thing you would actually buy, it's a bit weird because it's sort of just a new standard that they've invented, which doesn't offer a massive consumer benefit, at least from the surface level looking at it.
Well, it's certainly pretty expensive.
Yeah, it's $139 for 128 gig. It goes up to a maximum of 256 gig. It's worth noting that the Mate 20 Pro only comes in Australia in a 128 gig option, which in a year where we've seen the 512 gig Note 9, the 512 gig iPhone XS, 128 gig is a starting point now for even mid-range phones. So it seems that's the one part where I sit there and go, maybe they should have done a 256 gig model, or at least that 128 gig would have been, a decent upgrade. But 128 gig is still a lot of storage.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that the point Huawei, in a way, was trying to make was that if you want a phone with more onboard storage, you need to be driving a different car.
Oh God, yeah, absolutely. And it's funny you say that. No, it's not that funny, but that's literally the tie-in. Because if you do want a Mate 20 Pro with almost the exact identical bells and whistles, except for storage and memory, you go for the Porsche option, which is literally the same phone, which it wasn't in the Porsche version of the P20 Pro, but in this version it is literally the same phone, but with a leather back, kind of like leather flanking on the left and right side. There's really nothing different about it. I think you found, Alex, that it probably has less water resistance.
Yeah, it does. Fergus, do you want a phone that's made out of bits of cow?
I'm okay. My understanding was that the leather trend had happened and it had run its course, and we had moved on to all glass.
HP does have a leather laptop.
We did talk about this recently on the show. Yeah,
and there's no vegan version of it, which I had people ask me about, because if you did want to buy that laptop rather, you were stuck, and HP is not making a leather-free version, but at least Huawei is making a leather-free version of the Mate 20. It's a standard Mate 20 Pro, but the Porsche version is leather, and that's its main feature outside of an expensive price.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've got to admit, I kind of like the look of the red version. I think it's striking looking.
China only.
But yes, it's China only, and it is ferociously expensive. I mean, it's not that it's the red version's China only. Not that we're likely to see too many of them in Australia, if we see them at all. But that phone's something like $3,400 at currency conversion rates. Yeah, which is just it is very much a case, I think, of status symbol. You're buying it for the brand.
And we're kind of seeing that. I mean, Oppo's got has the Lamborghini version, which is basically, I mean, at least it's slightly different from the standard Find X. It has the super fast version of the charging thing.
But now they've offered a variant of the Find X with the Super VOOC, which is about $100 more expensive.
Yeah,
right?
which means that there's really no reason.
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen car tie-ins over the years. Acer did Ferrari. Lamborghini obviously had the laptops with Asus. This is not unusual. It's usually for people, I want to say, with more money than sense, who just want something so unusual. They would normally buy a Vertu if it was still a brand for phones, but at least in these sort of smartphones, it makes sense.
So I think that's half of it. I think the other half of it is that these smartphone vendors who aren't Apple are kind of doing the same experiment that Apple are doing, which is how much are people actually willing to pay, right? And this
you charge what the market will bear.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's sort of a way for them to dabble with that without completely shooting themselves in the foot on their main product.
And actually, I think there's a really interesting tie back to the Mate 20 Pro here, in that it'll sell in Australia for $1,599, which in the current smartphone space is not super expensive. It's not iPhone XS Max price. No. It's not even particularly high-end Note 9 price. Yeah. Apple, I think, are in a class of their own there, but it's high for a Huawei phone.
It is.
You look at what the P20 Pro launched at.
That was $999, right?
That was $1099. I'm fairly sure off the top of my head, and it is early here.
Which is what the Mate 20 is going to cost.
Exactly. But so this is Huawei still pushing forward, even for the regular, very good Mate 20 Pro. And of course, then there's the supersized option of the Mate 20 phone.
We're probably not going to see this. I think we'd all like to.
So which phone is this?
This is the Mate X or Mate 10. I don't really.
Mate
This is the
20X.
Mate 20X. It's
Or Mate 2010.
exactly. It's really confusing to know what these are. I think we're all going to call it the Mate 20X, which is a 7.2-inch smartphone that is more phablet than smartphone. I don't like using that term. I don't think any journo does, but we're back to it because 7 inches is basically tablet sizing for a phone. It's a bigger version of the Mate 20 Pro with a few features removed. Same triple camera technology, exactly the same. Slightly different fingerprint technology, so no infrared face cam on the front, no in-screen fingerprint sensor. It's on the back this time, but it still has the facial login using photo ID, from what I understand. And it comes with, I guess, unique let's try and steal the market from Nintendo and Galaxy Note 9
This was
features, which I feel like was a bad play of theirs, but I get what they're doing.
I think it's an attention-grabbing
It totally
play.
is.
And look, for a larger phone and for something that's going to have a stylus, and those who love styluses love them, and those who don't just tend to leave them inside their phones for the entire life of the phone. That wasn't a huge surprise, but I think they grabbed a lot of attention by saying, "Look, here's the Mate 2010 because they have a gamepad controller that's on the side
for the left."
Here's that compared to the Nintendo Switch, but they played the specifications game, and I don't think in this case it's about the specifications; it's about the gaming experience. Am I badly wrong here, Fergus?
Yes. No. Sorry. No. You're right. It's very early.
We need breakfast right now.
I thought it was pretty humorous in the crowd. It got a chuckle. It's one of those things where, like, yeah, sure, you can do like a side by side pixel per inch like comparison between the Galaxy, not the Mate 20X and the Switch.
Bigger and
like
everything.
you can do that, but it kind of doesn't matter because that's just like beside the point. Like, it doesn't matter what the specs of the Nintendo Switch are. If Zelda's on it, people want it. So it was very weird from that perspective. Like, yeah, sure, you can make that claim, but it's kind of meaningless. Like, the mobile gaming market and the Switch gaming market are almost different. They're different enough.
I wouldn't say they're completely different.
Like,
I mean, Razer has now, or coming out, a mobile gamepad, which is almost $300. And as cool as that is, they're going to struggle, in my opinion, because there aren't a lot of mobile games on Android that really, really require a gamepad. This has kind of got a similar sort of thing. There aren't a lot of high quality games on Android compared to what it is on the Switch, which is made as a gaming console.
It's interesting you bring that up, though, because I mean, discussions I've had with Razer about the new Razer Phone 2, which is their gaming Android phone. Their pitch is very much that the features within that phone are designed to remove the small-scale niggles that hardcore gamers worry about. Stuff like screen refresh rates and things like that. And I'm not entirely sure, especially with that lower resolution, that the Mate 20X is going to hit that sweet spot, it does at all.
It feels like it's one foot going in that gaming direction and one foot trying to steal the Galaxy Note crowd, and it sort of doesn't really nail either.
And while we might not see it at about the same price, in fact, as the Mate 20 Pro, I think without having had, obviously, substantial hands-on time with the Mate 2010, I think I'd probably prefer the Mate 20 Pro.
Absolutely. The Mate 20 Pro is the proper flagship. I mean, the things that make the Mate 20 Pro really, really cool, especially from my opinion, I think we've all said this, like wireless charging is nice. It really probably should be on the P20 Pro. Wireless reverse charging, as you've said to me before, Alex, is kind of a gimmick. Once you charge your friend's iPhone with it, they're never going to really refer to it again. It's a cute gimmick. But that in-screen fingerprint sensor and that camera are really the main drivers for me. The camera is incredible. Like it's doing some things that a lot of proper grade cameras, like as in 35mm carry-arounds, are doing. And for the first time in a long time, I genuinely feel I could use this in a way where I could with a mirrorless or a 35mm, which I like. I really like that feeling. I've gotten some amazing shots, not just on this trip, but also of my daughter back home before we left. But that in-screen fingerprint sensor is just so cool. And it's hard to relay that feeling of, when we first saw the Galaxy S8 and it was like this really sleek object from the future, this kind of continues that feeling, because now we've got in the Huawei Mate 20 Pro a sleek object from the future that responds to your finger when you touch the screen to unlock it.
You do have to push it a little bit harder than I expected, though. It almost felt. I'm with you. I love the technology. I love the idea of it, but it felt to me like, I'm again, it's early and I can't remember the exact model. Whichever the first of the iPhones that had Touch ID.
That was the 5S.
The 5S.
Yeah.
It was slow. You had to kind of work at it a bit, and you've got to work at this a little bit. I find you've got to push it a little bit harder than you might think. The response is okay. It does unlock. It works, but it feel in fingerprint sensor technology.
Yeah,
it's forwards and backwards because it's not quite as quick as even previous Huawei phones with regular.
That's right. On. It's a 10-layer pressure system from what they said at the launch, which is kind of neat to know. But it's also got the infrared facial ID as a backup. So even if, like, I've had a few misses on our pre-production units, but I genuinely feel that if that doesn't work, the infrared facial lock is actually a good alternative.
Now, the other thing that they announced, and I think everyone here was calling before they did, was a new wearable. Fergus, you excited about... Well, 2. Yes, actually, you're right. 2. But are you excited about the Huawei Watch GT, which is their flagship wearable?
I mean, so for me, the biggest barrier for smartwatches is, first of all, battery life, and the other side of it is actually having useful and meaningful software experiences on there. And I feel like the Huawei Watch GT, from the looks of it, does a really good job of addressing the first half of that problem, but it's the second half I'm not entirely convinced.
The second half appears to be a bit of a crashing disaster, actually.
Yeah, so they... Oh.
I was going to say, you probably should mention that they address the first half by having up to 2 weeks of battery life.
I was just about to say.
Sorry.
Yeah, so it's they're claiming 2 weeks of battery life. Whether how accurate that is not really known, but like that's a huge step up from the Apple Watch, which I believe they quote like 1 to 2 days.
I think you can get 2 days max, really.
I've gotten 2 days, but I think that's their general quote. And then the Galaxy Watch is 5 to 7 days, I believe.
I only get 3 to 4 on the previous gen, but I haven't tried the new ones. Yeah, right.
Yeah. And then Fitbit, which I think is about 5 to 7 days as well for the Ionic Inversa.
I miss my Pebble. That thing had great battery life.
It did. E-Ink was a really, really cool
But actually, the Pebble's not a bad comparison point because this is not an Android Wear watch. This is not an app-ready watch. This is using... it's a weird little...
They didn't really...
it's a low-end Linux variant. Someone else
I found the name of it. It's called Light OS.
Yeah,
right.
That's the one. But as such... The app situation is very, very open. It's that question of it's going to do the things that Huawei say it will. So, for example, the battery life means it can do sleep tracking, which a lot of smartwatches can't because of that battery life limitation. But beyond Huawei's own stuff, are we going to see other integrations? Are we going to see things that are needed? And again, this is something we've discussed on the show a bunch, that smartwatches kind of solved the big issues that they needed, stuff like fitness tracking, especially stuff like notifications, years ago. We're still, I think, and this, while the battery life is great, this doesn't involve some new thing where you can go, here's the reason to buy a smartwatch. You're still going to buy a smartwatch because you like wearing watches, and I'm someone who likes wearing watches, but we've had so many guests on the show who just say, no, I'm not buying one of those because I don't wear watches.
I want to say also that, and this wasn't technically announced, I guess, or wasn't publicized, but I looked it up today when I was writing this story up. It doesn't have Wi-Fi in it, so I'm guessing the reason why it's getting such a good battery life is because it'll be Bluetooth 5 LE. I mean, without Wi-Fi, there's probably going to be a limitation of some of the things it can actually do, especially in a real-time sort of capability. Now, it feels like it is very oriented to, doing just the things that Huawei has made it do. I hope I'm wrong. I hope it can be expanded to a lot more. But we usually see in devices that have proprietary operating systems, they're stuck. They reach a certain point, like a wall, and then they get stuck. And a part of me worries it'll be like that with this, but we also don't know if it'll come to Australia.
So while we're in London, which is still technically at the time of recording in the EU, another big story has broken.
But for how much longer?
well, perhaps that's a discussion for a political podcast. Right. I think you'll find. In that Google has announced that it's going to start charging phone makers if they want to bundle the suite of their apps, Gmail and Chrome and so on, onto Android devices sold in the EU. Fergus, what's the story here?
Well, so it comes off the back of Google getting just a massive antitrust fine earlier. I believe it was last year, and they've gone back and forth, been appealing it for a couple years. There's a $2 billion fine. It's enormous big deal. Basically, the EU regulators are pretty unhappy with the way that Google has a sort of my way or the highway approach to distributing Android, where if device makers want to use Android, they have to have all the Google apps preloaded. They have to use the Play Store. And it basically gives a market advantage because other platforms can't potentially take off in that way. And so this feels like a response to that, to try and deter the legal damage that is doing.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, and I mean, having been a tech journalist for officially way too long now, I'm getting real flashbacks to what Microsoft went through with the US Department of Justice when it was bundling IE, and I guess the intent from the EU is the same here, because Microsoft, for those younger players joining us, Microsoft was bundling IE with I think it was Windows 95.
Bundling, I'd say it's like almost forcing IE.
Well, yeah, that was pretty much what the DOJ came to, and basically they were legally compelled to stop doing that in order to try and correct the market. My question, I suppose, because obviously the majority of our listeners are not in the EU, though, is do we think this is going to have an impact on the way phones are made? Because basically EU phones will have a kind of blank Android without these Google apps, and if the makers want to provide them, they're going to have to give Google more money to do that. We already do see different software builds in different parts of the world, but that's usually to do with things like carrier frequencies, not so much to do with those kinds of apps.
I mean, do we see any phones presently in Australia that run without, like, or presently, I guess in any part of the world, that run without Google's stock apps? Is my question. China
China is the example.
China won't bend on that. Like, that's the reason why.
And if you've ever used the China model of a phone, and I've tested a few,
right.
I mean, it's an amazing experience in its own way, because
it's unbelievable.
It doesn't feel like anything else. I guess from a logical standpoint, North Korea is fairly similar from the few things we've seen leak out of it.
From the one phone it has available to
exactly. But I guess I'm also left wondering whether, because the intent here is also to say, right, well, you know, other browsers are available, other email packages are available.
That's true.
Is this the point where, I guess, I mean, certainly in the EU, if you're Firefox, you're probably rubbing your hands with glee because you might be able to get makers, especially with budget phones, to get on board with that.
Likewise with Opera, which has made some strides in that area.
And they're European-based, more or less European-based.
Yeah.
Is this the point where we might see the market correction happen that way, as in fact happened with IE? It wasn't so much the unbundling that did it; it was the fact that IE was frankly rubbish, and Chrome, Mozilla and Firefox and Chrome in order, and Opera's own browser just came along and said, "Well, we can do this better," and they did.
Yeah, I don't know. What I'm really curious about this whole bundling is what happens from an app store marketplace thing.
So I just want to jump in here. So to break it down. Android, the OS, still free. The Play Store, including Google's other apps, Gmail, Google Maps, YouTube, are a separate paid licensing agreement on top of that is optional. So device makers can make an Android device. They don't have to have the Google stuff. And then Chrome can be added on top for free, but isn't part of the bundle.
But the thing, I think the point you were trying to make is if Leigh buys one of these phones and goes, oh, well, I want to get on my Play Store apps,
And it was, but I was going to make a point because I was thinking about this when you were saying that, because there is a platform in America, or there's a device in America that already kind of adopts this angle. Amazon's Fire tablets are Android based, but do not include Play Store access, and I don't think include the Google Android or the Google apps necessarily. I don't. It's been a while.
It's been a little while since I've played with a Fire tablet. Because whilst they've been available in Australia, they've just never been huge.
Yeah.
You can sideload. There are hacks.
Yeah.
People who there are hacks for everything. Let's face it. People who are especially keen can do it, but by and large, no. Amazon want you in their ecosystem, and they do that way, and you get their the Silk browser and things like that. So there are models around this, and I think, and feel free to jump in and correct me if I'm wrong. I think Google's in a position where it, both for market reasons but also for legal reasons, it couldn't really start charging for Android because of the quantity of open source that's already in there. It'd be a nightmare for their lawyers.
Yeah, it's definitely a weird development. It'll be interesting to see both the short term and long term impacts. I imagine that the Play Store and all the Google apps, they will still be able to be side loaded or just downloaded as APK files, because it would be crazy for Google to not try and lure those users back into their ecosystem. But it's going to be really interesting to see what over the next couple of years, if this policy sticks around, because Google are appealing that fine, and if they successfully appeal that fine, who's to say maybe they go back to the way things used to be?
Well, that just about wraps up our 200th episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks to Fergus for joining us for the show.
No worries, thanks for having me.
And thanks to Leigh.
Cool. Thank you.
And thanks to you for listening. As always, we'd love to get your feedback on the show, so feel free to comment via Twitter or the Vertical Hold Facebook page. And remember, if you like what you hear, hit that subscribe button multiple times. Find your mum's phone, hit the subscribe button there, and leave us a review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you're listening.
Vertical Hold, Behind the Tech News, is proudly brought to you by Belkin.
Can we get breakfast now?